2 years had passed since our people first came to the mountain. What began as a refuge became a kingdom beneath the stone, and word of the mountain spread. Wandering dwarves who, like us, had searched for shelter and a place to call home, came to join us. Our refuge grew into a rising dwarven power. But peace was never truly ours. On the far side of the mountain, through deeper passages and forgotten roads, the goblins were preparing. At first, there were only skirmishes, but in time, those skirmishes became a full war beneath the stone. They fought with numbers and bloodthirsty cruelty. By then, we had built a city. But somewhere in the dark, beyond its walls, war was no longer waiting. It was coming. An attack on a Dwarven outpost could never remain unseen for long. Deep beneath the mountain, every road and every tunnel carried sound farther than any messenger. And when one post fell silent, help was always sent. But help does not always arrive in time. That night, a small war party was sent toward the broken outpost. Only a handful of warriors and 3 dwarves, whose names would one day be carved deeper than any mine. Every kingdom has a king, and every king has an heir. Ours was Varrik, young prince of the mountain folk, proud, restless, born with the weight of a crown long before he was ready to wear it. He had his father's fire, but not yet his father's patience. Beside him walked Eldrin, the stone listener. Quiet where Varrik was fierce, careful where others were blind. Eldrin did not only hear footsteps in the tunnels. He heard the mountain breathe. He heard grief in stone, fear in walls, warnings where others heard only silence. And with them came Borin, son of the Forge, a young master of metal and stone, with hands already stronger than many old craftsmen. He could read a broken blade the way others read a letter. 3 dwarves, not brothers by blood, but brothers by every road. They had survived together, by every fire they had shared, by every danger that had failed to take them apart. They came expecting battle. What they found was silence. The outpost had not been abandoned. It had been broken. The fires were dying. The carts were overturned. All lay scattered across the stone like treasure no one had lived long enough to carry. And the fallen had not run. They had died holding the line.
They stood here until the end.
Varrik said nothing more, but his hand tightened around his weapon, and in that silence his anger was louder than any cry. Borin knelt beside a goblin blade. At first, it looked like crude work. Dirty iron, ugly edges. A weapon made for killing, not honor. But Borin saw what others did not. The metal had been treated. The edge had been shaped with purpose. This was not scavenged.
No goblin forged this alone.
Eldrin moved away from the others. He placed his hand against the cold wall of the tunnel, and the mountain answered. In pressure, in memory, in the faint tremor left behind by too many feet. He heard the swarm. He heard the drums. He heard something heavy walking after the battle was already lost. The goblins had not come only to kill.
The stone remembers. They were searching. For what? A way down.
There, behind the wreckage, behind a collapsed stack of timber and stone, they found an old lower passage. It was not like the tunnels the dwarves had carved. The walls were too smooth, the lines too old, the air too cold. Thin, pale veins ran through the rock, faint as moonlight, trapped beneath stone. Borin touched the wall and frowned. No dwarf of theirs had made this passage. Eldrin listened again, and for a moment, even he looked afraid. Varrik wanted to follow at once, to hunt them, to answer blood with blood. But Borin held up the broken blade, and Eldrin kept his hand on the wall. This was no ordinary raid. The goblins had known where to strike. And after the killing, they had searched for something beneath the mountain. So the prince gave the order.
Fragment.
A smaller company would go below, into the old passage, into the dark, into whatever the goblins had tried so hard to find. That night we believed we were following goblins. We did not yet understand that we were following the first trace of something much older. Every people has stories. Some become legends, some survive in songs, others are lost before anyone writes them down. The dwarves were no exception. Their history was broken many times, by war, by exile, by mountains they built, defended, and lost. For a dwarf, a mountain was not just stone. It was shelter, memory, a place to raise walls, light forges, and call the darkness home. That is why dwarves learned to build quickly. Not for beauty, for survival. But the first dwarven ages left only fragments behind. Names without faces, maps without roads, kings without voices, halls buried beneath mountains. Most of it was gone. Or so they believed. Because under this mountain, behind a gate, no living dwarf had built. Something still remained. A piece of the past, waiting in the dark. Deep beneath the mountain, the goblins reached the place they had been digging toward. Not a mine, but a shrine, older than their age. Behind the collapse, they found an altar. And on that altar lay an ancient relic, a black triangle carved with pale ancient patterns. The goblin executioner took it without hesitation. Then they turned back. But above them, on the upper ledge, our heroes were already waiting. Varrik, Eldrin, Borin, and the remaining dwarves watched from the shadows.
Looks like they found what they were searching for. Then they do not leave with it.
For a moment, no one moved. Then Varrik gave the sign. The dwarves struck from above. Steel fell through dust and torchlight. Goblins screamed. The lower mine chamber broke into battle. At first, surprise was with the dwarves, but the advantage was with the goblins. Then the enraged war chief came rushing out from the tunnel of the altar. Varrik saw him and went straight for him, not as a prince, as a son of the fallen outpost. Around them, the battle widened. Borin crushed shields and bones with the weight of his hammer. Eldrin listened through the stone, hearing steps, breath, and danger before others could see it. The war chief was stronger than any goblin they had faced. Varrik could not match the war chief's strength. The blow threw him back. Falling to the ground, Varrik lost his sword. Borin saw the old weapon first. Half buried beneath broken stone, Borin lifted it and threw it through the chaos. Varrik caught the blade. The old sword opened dark flesh and drove the ancient blade into the war chief. The chamber fell silent for one breath. Then the war chief collapsed. His great hand opened and struck the stone. Only then did they see what the goblins had tried to carry away. The last goblins broke after that. Some tried to run. Some fought until they fell. When it ended, there was no song of victory. Only dead. The relic was theirs, but the mountain had taken its price. The survivors buried their fallen. No speeches, no triumph. Then they left the lower tunnels. Ahead of them waited only the long, silent road home.